Aisha, a 22-year-old college student, moves into her uncle's home in the city to pursue her studies. With her uncle and aunt frequently away for work, she finds herself spending more time alone with Rayhan, her 24-year-old cousin. Initially, their bond is casual, built on shared routines, small talk, and mutual understanding. But as Aisha's long-distance relationship with her boyfriend Kamil becomes emotionally distant, her connection with Rayhan deepens in unexpected ways. One rainy evening, the emotional tension between them culminates in a quiet, hesitant kiss. It's not lustful. It's tender and confused, born from shared loneliness rather than desire. The moment shatters their emotional balance and leaves them both overwhelmed by guilt and clarity. They avoid each other, silently acknowledging the line they crossed. Eventually, they confront the incident, expressing sorrow and mutual respect. Aisha decides to move out, ending both her relationship with Kamil and her emotional entanglement something with Rayhan. So subtle could grow into something so consuming. The story closes with her reflection. Not when I moved to the city for college, but in understanding. It was agreed that I would stay with my uncle's family until I got settled. She recognizes that infidelity isn't always physical. It can be emotional, quiet, subtle, spacious, and devastating, and close to, in the end, campus. What she and Rayhan shared wasn't wrong because of how it felt, but because of the context in which it happened. What no one anticipated was how often my uncle and aunt would be away. Long shifts, business trips, late evenings. They became routine. And that meant most days, it was just me and Rayhan. Rayhan, my uncle's son, was 2 years older than me. We weren't particularly close growing up. I remembered him as the quiet kid at family gatherings, polite but distant. But living under the same roof, routines overlap, and conversations stretch. It didn't take long before we slipped into a kind of rhythm. We walked to the university together when our schedules aligned. He helped me with difficult assignments and occasionally made me tea when I stayed up studying. It was unspoken. But something about his presence was grounding. I had a boyfriend, Camille, back home. We'd been together for a year, most of it long distance. He was sweet and predictable. We exchanged good mornings, how was your day texts, and scheduled video calls on weekends. But more often than not, those calls felt like obligations. Our conversations had lost their color. Sometimes he wouldn't even ask how I was really doing. Just surface-level updates before logging off. I told myself this was just what long distance did to people. You endure the gaps and wait for something more stable later. With Rayhan, things felt different. He noticed small things, like how I stopped drinking coffee after 4 p.m. because it made me anxious, or how I always checked the window before sleeping, even if it was already locked. He never made a show of it, just quietly observed, quietly responded. I began to feel seen in ways I hadn't for months. We started watching shows together in the evenings, one episode turning into 2, then 3. On weekends, we'd cook dinner together if his parents weren't around. I told myself it was just companionship, just the comfort of sharing space with someone who understood your silences. But something shifted the night it rained. That Friday, we both returned from campus drenched. The sudden downpour had caught us unprepared. Laughing, we hurried inside, shaking water from our bags and dripping shoes. The house was empty, as expected. My aunt had left a note. Gone to your uncle's office. Might be late. I changed quickly into dry clothes, an old sweatshirt and leggings, and found Rayhan already in the kitchen making tea. The smell of cardamom and the sound of rain against the windows made the house feel smaller, more intimate. We sat in the living room, both wrapped in our own blankets, sipping tea. The conversation was easy at first. Professors, assignments, how cold the lecture halls were. But then it deepened, almost without warning. He asked if I missed home. I nodded. Sometimes. Mostly the familiarity. Must be hard being in a relationship from so far away, he said, not accusingly, just curious. I hesitated. Yeah, harder than I thought it would be. He looked at me then, not just a glance, but a lingering, searching look. You ever feel like you're with someone but still kind of alone? I blinked. The question hit too close. Yes, I admitted. All the time. There was a pause. The kind that fills a room with more than silence. I felt something shift inside me, a quiet ache I hadn't named until then. It wasn't about romance or desire. It was about being seen. Really seen. By someone who bothered to look. I stood to clear our mugs, hoping to shake the weight of that moment. But even in the kitchen, with the tap running and the rain louder against the roof, I could feel it still clinging to the air between us. Later, when I lay in bed, I tried to remind myself that Rayhan was family, that we were just two people sharing space, nothing more. I repeated that like a mantra, but a part of me knew better. Something unspoken had begun to stir. And the strangest part? I didn't want it to stop. The days that followed felt heavier, like the silence between us had gained weight. We didn't talk about that night, about the look we shared or the words we didn't say, but it lingered, quietly, persistently. Still, we fell back into routine. College, meals, occasional conversation. But now, even small gestures felt charged. When Rayhan handed me a glass of water, our fingers brushed longer than they should have. When he passed behind me in the hallway, his presence felt closer, more intentional. And yet, neither of us said a word about it, as if naming it would make it real. It was a Wednesday when everything tilted. There had been a power outage. The rain returned that afternoon, and by the time we got home, the sky was already a heavy shade of gray. The house was dim, the windows misted with condensation. I lit a few candles in the living room, not for atmosphere, but out of necessity. Still, the flickering light made the room feel softer, like it belonged to a different world. Rehan came, in from the kitchen, balancing 2 mugs of tea, and sat beside me. We didn't say much at first, just sipped quietly, listening to the wind. One of the candles flickered between us, throwing shifting shadows on the walls. I don't think I've ever liked the rain, he said suddenly. Until recently. Looked at him, surprised. Why now? He shrugged. Maybe because, lately, the quiet feels less lonely. I knew what he meant, and I knew he wasn't just talking about the weather. The storm outside deepened. We stayed on the couch, shoulder to shoulder, watching nothing in particular. I don't even remember what was playing. My mind was too focused on the warmth beside me, on the rhythmic beat of my heart that felt too loud. When my head tilted, resting lightly against his shoulder, it wasn't a decision. It just happened. He didn't move away. If anything, he adjusted, just slightly, to make space for me. We stayed like that for a long time. Long enough to forget to move. Long enough to forget we shouldn't have been so close. Then he spoke, low and uncertain. Do you ever wonder if comfort can come from the wrong place? My breath caught. Yes, I whispered. He turned toward me, and I could feel the weight of his gaze even before I met it. There was a kind of longing in his eyes, not possessive or demanding, just searching, a question without words. He reached up and tucked a loose strand of hair behind my ear. His fingers brushed my cheek. I closed my eyes without meaning, too overwhelmed by the simplicity of the touch. Then he kissed me. It wasn't sudden. It wasn't hungry or rushed. It was slow, gentle, hesitant, as if giving me every chance to pull away. But I didn't. For a few brief, suspended seconds, everything else fell away. No family names, no past promises, no futures already decided, just warmth, just closeness. Just that quiet, aching relief of being understood. And then, a sharp vibration shattered the stillness. My phone buzzed from the coffee table, lighting, up with Kamil's name. Reality snapped back. I pulled away quickly, breathing hard, heart pounding in my throat. Rayhan sat back too, blinking like someone waking from a dream. Neither of us said anything. The silence this time wasn't gentle. It was thick with guilt, heavy with implication. My hand hovered over the phone, but I didn't answer. I couldn't. He stood up slowly. "I'm sorry," he said, barely above a whisper. I nodded, eyes downcast. "Me too." Without another word, he left the room. I sat there alone, surrounded by candlelight and the growing roar of the storm, trying to understand what had just happened, what it meant, and what it would break. The rain outside blurred the window panes. Inside, the line between right and wrong had already dissolved, and I wasn't sure if I could draw it again. The days after felt colder, even though the rain had passed. Sunlight returned, warm and indifferent, but it couldn't reach the quiet distance growing between us. Whatever was shared in that moment on the couch, tender, dangerous, real, was now a memory neither of us dared to name. We avoided each other gently. No slammed doors or bitter glares, just the kind of silence that swells between people who've crossed something sacred. Mornings came with fewer greetings. Evenings passed without our usual shows. The house had returned to normal, but we hadn't. Rihan no longer waited for me after lectures. He no longer offered tea or asked about my day. And I didn't reach out either. Every interaction now felt wrapped in the fear of acknowledgement, as if speaking about it would not only confirm what happened but solidify the damage it had already done. At night, I lay in bed replaying that kiss. The warmth of it, the hesitance, the heartbreak. But more than that, I remembered the look on his face when it ended. Not of lust or even guilt, but of sadness. As if he knew, even before I did, that there was no way forward from this without losing something we both valued. Kamil texted me twice the next morning, asking why I hadn't answered the night before. I said I'd fallen asleep early. A lie. So small it barely stung. But inside, I was unraveling. By the end of the week, I couldn't carry the silence anymore. Rihan and I crossed paths in the kitchen one afternoon. He was washing a glass, I was grabbing a book. Neither of us said anything for a moment. Then, without turning, he spoke. "We should talk." I nodded. "Yeah." We sat at the table, the same one where we used to eat takeout and laugh about our professors. It looked different now. Or maybe we did. "I didn't plan for that to happen," he said. His voice was calm, but his hands were restless, fingers fidgeting along the edge of the table. "I know," I replied. "I've been trying to convince myself that it was just a moment, that it didn't mean anything. But it did. And that's the part that scares me." I swallowed hard. "Me too." A pause. Then I added, "But it can't happen again." He looked up at me then, eyes tired but soft. "I know. You don't even have to say it." I nodded, feeling a lump form in my throat. "You're my cousin, Rayhan, and I'm with someone else. Even if that relationship is broken, it still exists. And this, whatever this is, it isn't fair to any of us." "I get it," he said, more gently than I deserved. "And I'm not trying to change your mind." We didn't hug. We didn't cry. We just sat there, quietly acknowledging the fragile line we had stepped over and the one we now had to rebuild. A few weeks later, I told my uncle and aunt I was looking for a small rental near campus. I said I needed space to focus on school and independence. They didn't question it. Maybe they sensed something beneath the surface, or maybe they were just too busy to look closely. Rihan and I remained polite. We still passed each other in the hallway, still exchanged quiet greetings, but the warmth was gone. Not out of resentment, but necessity. The kind of distance people keep when the nearness has already hurt too much. As for Camille, I ended it. No dramatic fight. No confession. Just a slow withdrawal. He noticed, of course, and asked what had changed. I gave him the only answer I could live with. I changed. And it was true. What happened with Rihan hadn't just betrayed a boyfriend or defied a family bond. It had shaken something within me. I realized how dangerously lonely I had become. How easy it was to mistake comfort for love. How quiet longing can be until it spills over in the wrong moment. I left that house with no intention of ever speaking of it again, but not out of shame, out of respect for what was, what almost was, and what couldn't be. People think infidelity always looks like lust. Sometimes it looks like two people searching for connection in the wrong place. Two people who didn't know how close they were to falling until they'd already hit the ground. And even now, long after, I still wonder, if the timing had been different, the circumstances kinder, would the ending have been? But some questions don't have answers. They just echo quietly in the spaces we leave behind.